Ma'am, last warning. Stand up and walk out, right now.
I cannot stand. I'm disabled, and you're violating federal law.
You don't look disabled. That thing's a scam.
Touch my chair, and you assault a DOJ official.
DOJ? Yeah, prove it.
You're on body cam. This ends your career.
Officer Kyle Riker had spent 9 years on the force cultivating a reputation that he mistook for respect, but which his colleagues recognized as a liability waiting to explode. At 32 years old, Riker moved with the swagger of a man who believed the badge on his chest granted him immunity from the consequences of his own prejudice. He was the type of officer who referred to citizens as subjects even before a crime had been committed, and who viewed his patrol zone not as a community to serve, but as a territory to dominate. On a bright, unseasonably warm Thursday in May, Riker made a choice that would cost the city of Charleston $6.4 million and obliterate his career before the sun set. He walked into a situation armed with nothing but bias and arrogance, convinced he was about to take down a fraudster. Instead, he was about to go to war with one of the most powerful civil rights attorneys in the United States Department of Justice. Before we get into the details of this catastrophic failure of judgment, tell me, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that authority should always be checked by accountability, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are building a community here dedicated to the truth, and your support ensures these stories don't get buried under administrative rug sweeping. The setting for this incident was the Gilded Oak, a bistro that sat like a jewel in the center of the city's most affluent shopping district. It was the kind of place where the valet parking cost more than most people's lunch, and the patio was enclosed by manicured boxwood hedges and wrought iron fencing. The air always smelled of roasted garlic and expensive perfume. It was a space designed for leisure for the wealthy to see and be seen. And on this particular Thursday, it was the temporary office of Dr. Eleanor Vance. Dr. Vance was 54 years old, a woman of immense dignity and quiet power. For the last 2 decades, she had served in the Department of Justice, rising through the ranks to become the section chief for the Disability Rights Section. She was the architect of modern accessibility standards, a woman who had forced Fortune 500 companies and municipal governments to their knees in federal court to ensure equal access for all Americans. She didn't just know the Americans with Disabilities Act. She had written significant portions of the interpretive guidance used to enforce it. That afternoon, Dr. Vance was in town for a conference, but she was using her lunch break to conduct a discreet compliance check, a secret shopper evaluation of local businesses that had recently come under scrutiny for accessibility violations. She was a black woman with graying hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing a tailored navy blazer that probably cost more than Officer Riker's monthly salary. She was seated in a high-tech carbon fiber mobility scooter, her legs resting motionless on the footplate due to a degenerative neuromuscular condition that made standing for long periods agonizing and walking nearly impossible. She had arrived at the Gilded Oak at 11:45 a.m., navigated the ramp, which she noted was slightly too steep to be fully compliant, and requested a table on the patio. She ordered the sea bass, and a sparkling water opened her tablet and began reviewing case files. She looked like exactly what she was, a high-powered professional enjoying a working lunch. She was bothering no one. Her scooter was tucked neatly against the table, not blocking the aisle. She spoke softly to the server. She was the ideal customer. But to the wrong set of eyes, Dr. Vance's presence was a disruption. To a mind clouded by bias, a black woman in a wheelchair in a premium space wasn't a paying customer. She was a nuisance. She was an anomaly that needed to be corrected. And unfortunately for Dr. Vance, and ultimately for the city's taxpayers, the man watching her from the hostess stand didn't see a DOJ section chief. He saw a problem that he felt entitled to solve. Preston Wells was 28 years old and had been the general manager of the Gilded Oak for less than 6 months. He was a man who obsessed over optics. In his mind, the bistro wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage, and he was the director. He carefully curated the seating arrangements, placing the most attractive and affluent-looking guests near the street-facing railing to attract similar clientele while shuffling tourists and families to the back corners. He wore suits that were too tight and a watch that was too big, desperately trying to project an image of old money that he didn't possess. Preston prided himself on maintaining an exclusive atmosphere. He believed that the comfort of his regulars, mostly white, older, wealthy patrons, depended on the space looking a certain way. And when he looked out at table 4, the prime spot near the entrance, he didn't like the optic. He saw Dr. Eleanor Vance. He didn't see the tailored blazer or the expensive tablet. He saw a black woman in a wheelchair as he mentally categorized her sleek mobility device, taking up valuable real estate during the lunch rush. He watched her for 15 minutes, his irritation growing. To Preston, mobility devices belonged in hospitals or nursing homes, not on his patio. He convinced himself that the scooter was an eyesore, a clunky machine ruining the European bistro vibe he was trying to cultivate. But his bias went deeper than aesthetics. As he watched her type on her tablet, a cynical narrative began to form in his mind. Why is she sitting there so long? Is she really disabled? He had read stories online about people faking disabilities to get priority seating or to bring pets into restaurants. The more he stared, the more he convinced himself that Dr. Vance was a scammer. She moved her upper body too easily. She reached for her water glass with steady hands. In Preston's uneducated medical opinion, she didn't look disabled enough to need that scooter. "She's loitering," Preston muttered to the hostess, a college student who looked confused by his assessment. "She ordered the sea bass, Preston. That's a $40 entree. She's eating—" The hostess whispered back, trying to de-escalate her manager. "She's been nursing that water for 20 minutes. She's camping out. And that cart is blocking the flow of traffic." Preston lied. The scooter was nowhere near the walkway. "I want that table turned over. We have reservations coming in." Preston walked past Dr. Vance's table, pretending to check a planter box, conducting a close-range inspection. He noted that she didn't look up at him. She was focused on her work. To him, this wasn't focus. It was avoidance. It was the behavior of someone who knew they didn't belong. He went back inside, his mind made up. He wasn't going to confront her himself. That could be messy. He wanted the heavy hand of the law to do his dirty work. He wanted her removed, and he wanted it done publicly to send a message that the Gilded Oak was not a place for loiterers. He picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency police line, but he knew exactly what words to use to ensure a quick response. He didn't say he had a paying customer he didn't like. He fabricated a crisis. "This is the manager at the Gilded Oak on King Street," Preston said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I have a situation here. There's a woman refusing to leave. She's blocking the fire exit with a motorized cart, and she's becoming aggressive with my staff. She's shouting at other customers. I think she might be mentally unstable. We need an officer to remove her immediately." The dispatcher logged the call: disorderly conduct, refusal to leave, blocking emergency exits. It was a complete fabrication. Dr. Vance hadn't spoken a word to anyone but her server. She wasn't blocking anything. She wasn't aggressive. But Preston Wells knew that once the police arrived, the narrative would be his word against hers. And in his experience, men like him, managers of high-end establishments, were always believed over black women in wheelchairs. He hung up the phone with a smug satisfaction, believing he had just solved his optic problem. He had no idea he had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would destroy his own livelihood. Officer Kyle Riker was 3 blocks away when the call came in. He was sitting in his patrol car, scrolling through social media, bored with the midday lull. When the dispatch came over the radio, "Disorderly female at the Gilded Oak blocking exits, aggressive behavior," he perked up. This was his preferred type of call, a quality of life enforcement, a chance to assert authority over someone who was disrupting the order of things. Riker's personnel file was a roadmap to disaster, a document that should have triggered an intervention years ago. In his 9 years with the department, he had accrued 14 internal affairs complaints. Most followed a disturbing pattern rapid escalation of minor infractions involving minority citizens. There was the incident 2 years prior where he tackled a Hispanic teenager for jaywalking, resulting in a broken collarbone for the boy. Riker claimed the boy had bladed his body in a threatening manner. The department cleared him. Then there was the time he detained a black grandmother for 45 minutes because she was sitting on a park bench that he deemed too close to a playground where she had no children playing. He cited her for loitering. The charges were later dropped, but the humiliation remained. Riker's supervisors knew he was a problem. His evaluations were peppered with euphemisms like needs to improve community relations and favors aggressive enforcement over mediation. But Riker was also productive. He wrote tickets. He made arrests. He kept the streets of the wealthy districts clean. In the culture of the department, his results excused his methods. He was viewed as a rough tool, but a useful one. As he drove toward the Gilded Oak, Riker's mind was already constructing the scenario. He knew the manager, Preston. They had chatted a few times. Riker liked Preston. He thought the guy ran a tight ship. If Preston was calling, the woman must be a real problem. Riker pictured a homeless woman, perhaps mentally ill, pushing a shopping cart, or a stolen wheelchair screaming at the rich folks eating their salads. He prepared himself for a confrontation. He turned off his empathy and turned on his tactical mindset. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb right in front of the bistro's entrance, leaving the lights flashing to announce his presence. It was a power move. He wanted everyone to know the police were here to handle business. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his utility belt, checking the fit of his sunglasses. He was 6'1", muscular, with a shaved head and a demeanor that screamed, "Do not test me." He walked into the bistro, bypassing the host stand. Preston Wells met him near the bar, looking relieved and self-righteous. "Officer, thank God," Preston said, keeping his voice low but urgent. "She's out on the patio, table 4. She's been there for an hour just nursing a water, yelling at the staff when we asked her to move her cart. It's a fire hazard. My customers are terrified." Riker nodded, absorbing the lie without a single follow-up question. He didn't ask to see the cart. He didn't ask which staff members had been yelled at. He didn't ask to interview the terrified customers. He just trusted the man in the suit. "I'll handle it," Riker said, his hand resting instinctively near his holster. He strode out to the patio, scanning the tables. He expected to see a scene, someone shouting, waving their arms, looking disheveled. Instead, he saw Dr. Eleanor Vance. She was quietly eating a forkful of sea bass, reading her tablet. The sunlight filtered through the umbrella, casting a dappled shadow on her table. To any reasonable observer, she looked like a professor or a business executive. But Riker didn't see a professional. He saw a black woman in a space where he felt she didn't belong, using a device that didn't fit his definition of normal. The fact that she was calm didn't register as innocence. It registered as arrogance. She thinks she can just sit here and ignore the rules, he thought. The disconnect between Preston's description and the reality before him should have made Riker pause. Instead, it made him angry. He felt she was mocking the system by acting so unbothered. He walked straight to her table, casting a shadow over her lunch. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He opened with a command. "Ma'am, we need to talk. You need to pack it up." Dr. Vance paused, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. She placed it down slowly, wiped her mouth with the linen napkin, and turned her head to look up at him. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely devoid of fear. That lack of fear was her first mistake in Riker's eyes. "Excuse me, officer," she said, her voice measured and articulate. "I'm in the middle of my lunch. The manager says you're causing a disturbance and blocking the exit. You're trespassing now. Time to go." Riker had decided the outcome before he even opened his mouth. He wasn't there to investigate. He was there to evict. And he had no idea he was standing in front of the woman who wrote the federal guidelines on exactly what he was not allowed to do. The patio of the Gilded Oak grew instantly silent. The chatter of business deals and social gossip evaporated, replaced by the tension of a police encounter. Dozens of eyes turned toward Table 4. Dr. Vance remained seated, her posture perfect, despite the heavy carbon fiber frame of her mobility device supporting her spine. She looked at Officer Riker, analyzing him not just as a citizen, but as a federal monitor analyzing a liability. "Officer," Dr. Vance said, her voice projecting clearly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "I am not blocking any exit. I am dining. I have paid for this meal and I have caused no disturbance. Who exactly accused me of this?" Riker stepped closer, encroaching on her personal space. He crossed his arms, his biceps flexing, a physical intimidation tactic he used on street corners. "The manager wants you gone. That makes this private property, and you are trespassing. And frankly, this cart is a hazard." "It is not a cart," Dr. Vance corrected him, her tone hardening slightly. "It is an FDA-approved mobility device, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, I am entitled to use it in any public accommodation. Asking me to leave because of my disability is a violation of federal law." Riker laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. He looked her up and down, making a show of inspecting her body. He saw legs that weren't atrophied shoes that looked like regular flats. In his medical ignorance, he made a snap judgment. "Look, lady, you don't look disabled to me," Riker said, delivering the line that would later be played on national news loops for weeks. "I see people like you all the time. You get a little tired, you buy one of these things off the internet so you can cut lines and get the good tables. It's a scam." A gasp rippled through the nearby tables. A woman at the next table, an elderly white lady with a cane, looked horrified. Dr. Vance took a deep breath. She knew this script. She had sued police departments for this exact behavior. "Officer, my medical history is not up for your review. I have a degenerative neuromuscular condition. I cannot stand without assistance. I am asking you to step back and allow me to finish my meal." "I'm not stepping back." Riker snapped, his ego bruised by her resistance. He felt he was losing control of the scene. The audience was watching and he needed to win. "I'm ordering you to leave. If you're not disabled, you can stand up and walk out of here like a normal person. Prove it. Stand up." "I will not," Dr. Vance said. "And you have no legal authority to demand that." "I have the authority to remove a trespasser," Riker retorted. "You're faking it for sympathy and you're wasting my time. Now are you going to drive that toy out of here, or am I going to have to help you?" "This is not a toy. It is my legs," Dr. Vance said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "And if you touch me or this device, you are violating my civil rights and committing assault." Riker's face flushed red. He wasn't used to subjects quoting the law at him. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. The fact that this woman, this black woman in a fancy restaurant, was lecturing him was intolerable. He leaned down, placing his hands on the table, looming over her. "You want to talk about rights," Riker sneered. "You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to leave before I drag you out of here. Those are your options. I'm done playing games. I'm giving you 3 seconds to stand up and walk away from the table." "I cannot stand," Dr. Vance repeated, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair to steady herself against his aggression. "I am a Department of Justice official. I advise you to check yourself immediately." "Yeah, and I'm the King of England," Riker mocked. "Time's up." This was the pivot point. Riker had abandoned all police procedure. He wasn't de-escalating. He was antagonizing. He had convinced himself that she was a fraud, and therefore she deserved no dignity. He saw her refusal to stand not as a physical impossibility, but as willful disobedience. In his mind, forcing her to stand would expose her lie. He was about to perform a miracle cure by force, expecting her to walk once she realized he was serious. It was a level of ableist arrogance that was almost incomprehensible, yet it was playing out in real time. Dr. Vance knew the window for reasoning with this officer had closed, but she had to make one final attempt to create a record of compliance. She reached slowly into her blazer pocket. "Don't reach," Riker shouted, his hand dropping to his taser. "I am removing my identification," Dr. Vance announced clearly. She pulled out a leather wallet. She flipped it open to reveal two things: her Department of Justice credentials featuring the gold seal and her rank as section chief, and a bright red medical alert card that detailed her condition and the necessity of her device. She held them up. "Officer, look at this badge. I am Section Chief Eleanor Vance of the Civil Rights Division. This is a federal credential. Verify it with your dispatch." Riker barely glanced at it. He didn't want to see it. If he acknowledged the badge was real, he would have to admit he was wrong, and men like Riker would rather burn the world down than admit a mistake in front of an audience. "You can buy those online for $20. Riker scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "I've seen 'em all. Sovereign citizen nonsense. Putting a gold star on a piece of leather doesn't make you a Fed. It makes you a fraud, just like the chair. It is a federal crime to impersonate an officer. Do you think I would risk that?" Dr. Vance asked. "Call your supervisor now." "I am the supervisor right now." Riker lied. He wasn't. "And I'm done talking." Riker moved around the table. He didn't go for her arms immediately. He went for the device. He grabbed the handlebars of the mobility scooter, the controls that allowed Dr. Vance to move, to retreat, to exist in the world. "Get your hands off my chair," Dr. Vance yelled, her composure finally cracking under the threat of physical violence. "Touching this device is touching my person. I'm impounding the vehicle as evidence of the fraud," Riker stated, making up laws as he went. He yanked on the handlebars, trying to pull the heavy device backward away from the table. The chair jerked violently. Dr. Vance was thrown forward against her seatbelt. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips as the sudden motion jarred her spine. The patrons on the patio were on their feet now. Phone cameras were raised like a firing squad. "Hey, she showed you her badge," a man in a business suit shouted from 2 tables away. "Stop it." "Back off," Riker roared at the crowd, pointing a finger. "This is a police operation. Interfere and you're next." He turned back to Dr. Vance. She was clutching her side, grimacing in pain. The sudden movement had triggered a spasm in her back. "You are hurting me," she gasped. "Then stand up," Riker yelled, grabbing her arm this time. He gripped her bicep with crushing force. "You're under arrest for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and resisting an officer. Stand up." "I can't," she wheezed. Riker didn't believe her. He hauled her upward. He pulled with the strength of a man used to handling drunk college students, not fragile women with neuromuscular diseases. He dragged her out of the seat. Dr. Vance's legs buckled immediately. They were dead weight. She collapsed towards the concrete, held up only by Riker's grip on her arm, which was now twisting her shoulder at an unnatural angle. "Stop fighting me!" Riker screamed, interpreting her inability to stand as resistance. He spun her around, slamming her chest against the side of the table. "I am not fighting!" Dr. Vance sobbed, the humiliation burning hotter than the pain. "My legs do not work." Riker ignored it. He forced her arms behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the stunned silence of the restaurant. Click, click, click. He tightened them aggressively, digging the metal into her wrists. "You can drop the act now," Riker hissed in her ear. "You're going for a ride." The scene on the patio was chaotic. Dr. Vance was effectively suspended by the handcuffs, her toes barely dragging on the ground as Riker held her up. She couldn't support her own weight. Every step Riker took dragged her shoulders further out of their sockets. "Officer, look at her legs. She's dragging her feet," the hostess screamed, finally breaking her silence. "She can't walk. She'll walk when she wants to," Riker grunted, hauling Dr. Vance toward the exit. "My chair," Dr. Vance managed to say, her voice faint. "You cannot leave my chair. It costs $18,000. It is my legs. It stays here, Riker said. We'll have sanitation pick it up. Leaving a mobility device behind was a direct violation of the ADA and department policy. It was the equivalent of taking a suspect's legs and throwing them in a dumpster. Riker dragged her through the restaurant, past the horrified diners inside. Preston Wells watched from the bar, his face pale. This wasn't the clean removal he had pictured. This was brutal. But he said nothing complicit in his silence. Outside, the sidewalk was hot. Riker didn't slow down. He marched, practically carried Dr. Vance to the cruiser. He opened the back door and shoved her inside. Because she couldn't use her legs to climb in, he had to force her, bending her body awkwardly to fit into the cramped back seat. She cried out as her knee slammed against the door frame. "Quiet!" Riker snapped, slamming the door shut. He walked around to the driver's side, adrenaline pumping. He felt powerful. He had won. He had cleared the scene. He looked back at the bistro. Several people were standing on the sidewalk filming. He gave them a defiant stare before getting into the car. "You're making a mistake," a young woman shouted, holding her phone high. "She's DOJ. We heard her." Riker laughed to himself as he put the car in gear. "DOJ, right. And I'm the Pope." He drove toward the precinct, watching Dr. Vance in the rearview mirror. She was slumped against the window, tears streaming down her face, breathing in shallow, pained gasps. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't cursing. She was reciting something. Riker turned down his radio to listen. She was reciting case law. Title II of the ADA, excessive force, deprivation of rights under color of law, Section 1983. "Shut up back there," Riker said. "Officer Riker," Dr. Vance said, her voice shaking but clear. "You have arrested a federal agent. You have abandoned my medical device. You have caused me physical injury. I am memorizing your badge number 4922. It will be the last badge you ever wear." Riker turned up the radio to drown her out. He felt a flicker of doubt for the first time. Her voice was too educated, too precise, but he squashed it. He was committed now. He had to book her. If he booked her, he was right. If he released her, he admitted he was wrong. He chose to double down. The drive to the 4th Precinct took 10 minutes. Riker pulled into the Sallyport, parked, and hauled Dr. Vance out of the car. She collapsed onto the concrete floor of the garage immediately. Riker sighed, annoyed. "Get up," he said. "I cannot," she whispered. 2 other officers walked over, looking concerned. "Riker, what do you have?" one asked, looking at the well-dressed woman on the floor. "Trespassing, resisting. She's playing the I can't walk game. Grab her other arm." Between them, they dragged Dr. Vance into the booking area. They brought her before the desk sergeant, a man named Miller who had been on the force for 30 years. Miller was old school, but he was sharp. He looked over the counter and saw a woman in a $2,000 blazer being held up like a sack of flour, her expensive shoes scuffed from being dragged. "Put her in the chair," Miller ordered, gesturing to the restraint chair. "Don't hold her up like that." They lowered her into the chair. Dr. Vance slumped forward, exhausted. "Charges?" Miller asked, eyeing Riker. "Trespassing at the Gilded Oak, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, refusal to comply," Riker rattled off. "Claim to be disabled but wouldn't provide proof. Claim to be a Fed." Miller looked at Dr. Vance. "Ma'am." Dr. Vance lifted her head. "Sergeant, my name is Dr. Eleanor Vance. I am the Section Chief of the Disability Rights Section of the U.S. Department of Justice. My credentials are in my wallet, which Officer Riker confiscated. I demand you call Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark immediately. And I need medical attention." Miller froze. He looked at Riker. "You have her wallet." "Yeah, it's right here," Riker said, tossing the leather wallet onto the high counter. "Full of fake ID junk." Miller opened the wallet. He pulled out the DOJ credentials. He felt the weight of the badge. He looked at the holographic seal. He looked at the ID card. He had seen fake badges before. This wasn't one of them. This was government issue, high level. He looked at the medical card. Degenerative neuropathy, wheelchair dependent. Miller's face went gray. He looked up at Riker, who was leaning against the counter looking bored. Riker. Miller said, his voice very quiet. Where is her wheelchair? I left it at the scene. Sanitation can get it. It's evidence. Miller closed his eyes for a second. He was doing the mental math of the lawsuit that was about to hit them. Arresting a Fed, assaulting a disabled woman, abandoning an $18,000 medical device. You left a disabled woman's wheelchair on the street, Miller asked slowly. She's not disabled, Sarge. Look at her legs. It's a scam. Riker, shut up, Miller snapped. He turned to the other officers. Uncuff her. Now. Get the medic. Now. Sarge, she's a suspect, Riker started. She is a section chief for the Department of Justice, you moron, Miller roared, slamming the badge onto the counter. You just arrested the woman who sues police departments for a living. You dragged a disabled federal agent out of a restaurant. Riker stared at the badge. The blood drained from his face. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a cold, sick feeling in his gut. She didn't look, Riker stammered. Give me your gun, Miller said, reaching over the counter. And your badge. You're done. Go sit in the break room and don't speak to anyone. Dr. Vance rubbed her raw wrists as the cuffs came off. She looked at Riker, her eyes burning with a justice that was about to rain down on him. You assumed, she said softly, that because I looked like a target, I wasn't a threat. You are about to learn how wrong you were. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By the time Dr. Vance was being treated at the hospital for a sprained shoulder and soft tissue damage, the video from the bistro had gone viral. It had 4 million views in 3 hours. The image of Riker dragging a black woman while her scooter sat empty in the background was splashed across every news network in the country. The Civil Rights Division of the DOJ didn't just investigate, they descended. The entire Charleston Police Department was placed under a microscope. Investigators found the pattern. Riker's supervisors had ignored the 14 complaints, the bias, the aggression. Preston Wells, the manager at the Gilded Oak, was fired the next morning. The bistro's corporate owners issued a groveling apology, but the damage was done. Protesters lined the sidewalk for weeks. The exclusive atmosphere Preston had tried to protect was destroyed by his own bigotry. Officer Kyle Riker was terminated 5 days after the incident. But it didn't end there. Dr. Vance pressed charges. Riker was indicted for deprivation of rights under color of law and assault. He pleaded guilty to avoid federal prison time, accepting a plea that barred him from ever working in law enforcement or security again. At 32, his career was over, his name permanently synonymous with ableist brutality. The city settled Dr. Vance's civil suit for $6.4 million. But Dr. Vance didn't keep the money. She donated the entire sum to a legal defense fund for victims of police brutality with disabilities. She also forced the department into a consent decree. They had to rewrite their entire procedure for interacting with citizens with disabilities. Every officer had to undergo 40 hours of training designed and overseen by Dr. Vance's office. 3 months later, Dr. Vance returned to Charleston to oversee the training. She sat in her new mobility device at the front of the auditorium watching 200 officers file in. She saw the fear and respect in their eyes. This story isn't just about a bad cop. It's about the invisible bias that we all carry. It's about the assumption that disability has a look. It's about the arrogance of thinking we can judge someone's reality by a glance. Officer Riker saw a black woman in a chair and assumed she was less than. He assumed she was powerless. He forgot that dignity doesn't require standing up. Power doesn't need to shout. True strength is knowing that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, And sometimes the person you try to break is the very person holding the hammer that will shatter your glass house. What do you think? Should officers be required to call a supervisor before arresting someone claiming a disability? And do you think $6.4 million was enough for the humiliation Dr. Vance endured? Let me know in the comments below. And please be kind to each other. You never know who is struggling just to stay seated.
Turn around! Hands behind your back, now!
I'm not resisting. You have no probable cause.
You don't get to tell me the law.
Actually, I do, and this arrest is...
The high-definition lens of the dashboard camera captured the scene in stark, unforgiving detail. The timestamp read 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and Officer Kyle Braden had absolutely no idea that the man he was currently shoving against the side of a rusted Ford F-150 was the Department of Justice's senior federal community liaison for the entire Mid-Atlantic region. The man in the handcuffs, whose face was pressed against the hot metal of his own truck, wasn't resisting. He wasn't shouting. He was Marcus Thorne, a man who had spent the last 25 years mediating conflicts between police departments and the communities they served. He had authored federal guidelines on de-escalation. He had sat across the table from governors and attorney generals, and now he was about to become the plaintiff in a civil rights lawsuit that would expose the rot inside the Oak Creek Police Department for the entire nation to see. Before we unravel the layers of this infuriating and vindicating story, I need you to take a moment. Pause right here. Go to the comments section and tell me where you are watching from, your city, your state. And if you believe that a badge should represent protection, not intimidation, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are building a community that values truth and accountability, and you don't want to miss how this story ends. Trust me, the fallout is biblical. Marcus Thorne did not look like a federal official that morning. At 58 years old, he was built like a retired linebacker who had kept in shape with broad shoulders and graying hair shaved close to his scalp. He wasn't wearing his tailored suits or his DOJ badge on a lanyard. He was wearing a faded navy blue t-shirt covered in sawdust, thick canvas work pants, and protective eyewear. He was doing what he did every Tuesday morning on his day off, helping his neighbor. Eleanor Vance was 78 years old, a widow who had lived in the house next to Marcus for 30 years. Her husband George had passed away 4 years prior, and the maintenance of their sprawling Victorian home had become too much for her. But she refused to leave. It was her home. It held her memories. So Marcus stepped in. He mowed her lawn. He cleaned her gutters. And on this particular Tuesday, he was replacing the rotted lattice work under her front porch. It was peaceful work. The neighborhood, a quiet enclave of oak trees and manicured lawns, was silent except for the rhythmic sound of Marcus prying old wood loose. He had parked his truck in Eleanor's driveway to have easy access to his tools. The scene was the definition of domestic tranquility, a neighbor helping a neighbor. There was no crime, there was no victim, there was only community. But to Officer Kyle Braden, patrolling slowly down Elm Street in Cruiser 402, the scene looked different. Braden was 29 years old, with 3 years on the force and a reputation for being proactive. In police jargon, proactive can mean diligent or it can mean aggressive. Braden viewed the world through a windshield that filtered everything into 2 categories: sheep and wolves. He saw a large black man with a pry bar kneeling at the foundation of a house owned by an elderly white woman. He didn't see the safety goggles. He didn't see the neat stack of new lumber waiting to be installed. He didn't check the address against a list of contractors. He saw a threat. Braden hit his brakes. He didn't call it in. He didn't run the plate on the truck, which would have come back registered to Marcus Thorne at the address directly next door. He didn't observe for a few minutes to see if the man was actually breaking in or building up. He simply threw the cruiser into park, stepped out, and let his bias take the wheel. The sound of the heavy car door slamming shut broke the morning silence. Marcus Thorne paused the pry bar in his right hand resting against the rotted wood he was removing. He didn't turn immediately. He took a breath, sensing the change in the atmosphere. He had worked in law enforcement adjacent roles long enough to know the sound of a police arrival. It had a specific cadence, hurried, heavy, authoritative. "Drop the weapon. Step away from the house." The voice was high-pitched, laced with an adrenaline spike that Marcus recognized immediately. In his training seminars, he called this cortisol voice, when an officer is so ramped up on their own fear response that they lose the ability to modulate their tone. Marcus slowly placed the pry bar on the grass. He didn't drop it. Dropping metal creates a sharp noise that can be startled into a gunshot. He placed it down with deliberate slowness. Then he stood up, dusting his hands on his pants, and turned around. Officer Braden was standing at the edge of the driveway, his hand hovering over his holster. The retention strap was already undone. His stance was bladed left foot forward, right foot back, ready to draw or fight. "Good morning, officer," Marcus said. His voice was a deep, calm baritone. It was the voice that had calmed riots in Baltimore and negotiated standoffs in Detroit. "I'm removing some rotted wood for Mrs. Vance." "I said step away from the house. Walk towards me. Keep your hands where I can see them," Braden shouted, ignoring the explanation entirely. Marcus didn't move towards the officer. He knew the law better than Braden ever would. He was on private property. He was engaged in lawful activity. He had no obligation to approach an officer who had not articulated a reasonable suspicion of a crime. "I am standing still, officer," Marcus said, keeping his hands open at chest level, the universal sign of non-aggression. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I live next door at 412 Elm. I am helping my neighbor with her repairs. If you look at the pile of lumber to your left, you will see the materials I purchased this morning." Braden's eyes darted to the lumber, then snapped back to Marcus. The evidence of innocence was right there, but Braden was already committed to the narrative in his head. Backing down now would feel like a loss of control, and for officers like Braden, control was everything. "I don't care where you say you live. We've had reports of burglaries in this area. You're holding a pry bar at a window entry point. That's possession of burglary tools. Now walk towards me or I will make you walk towards me." Marcus analyzed the situation instantly. Possession of burglary tools required intent. A pry bar used for construction in broad daylight was not a burglary tool. The reports of burglaries was likely a fabrication to establish probable cause. Crime stats in this zip code were negligible. Braden was fishing. He was manufacturing a crisis. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even steadier. "I am not going to leave the curtilage of this property. You are currently engaging in a consensual encounter. I am declining to engage further. Unless you can articulate a specific crime I am committing, I am going to return to my work." It was the wrong thing to say to a man with a fragile ego and a badge. Braden's face flushed a deep, angry red. He wasn't used to suspects using words like curtilage or articulate. He took 3 aggressive steps up the driveway, entering the private property without a warrant. "You think you're a lawyer?" Braden sneered, closing the distance. "I need to see ID, now." "I am not required to provide identification unless I am being detained for a crime," Marcus replied. "Am I being detained, officer? And if so, for what specific offense?" Braden stopped 5 feet from Marcus. The younger man was vibrating with tension. He was close enough now that Marcus could see the sweat beading on his forehead under the brim of his cap. "You're detained for investigation of a felony burglary," Braden spat out. "Now give me your ID." The front door of the Victorian house creaked open. Eleanor Vance stepped out onto the porch. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. She was wearing a floral housecoat and slippers, her white hair tied back in a loose bun. She had heard the shouting, though her hearing aids weren't in the volume of Braden's voice had penetrated the thick oak door. "Marcus," she called out. her voice trembling slightly. "Marcus, what's wrong? Is everything all right?" Marcus didn't turn his head, keeping his eyes locked on Braden, but he spoke loudly enough for her to hear. "It's fine, Eleanor. The officer is just confused. Please go back inside." Braden spun toward the old woman, his hand coming up in a "stop" gesture that looked more like a strike. "Ma'am, get back inside. Lock the door for your own safety." Eleanor looked confused. She looked from the angry young policeman to her friend Marcus. "He's fixing my porch," she said, her voice gathering a bit of strength. "He's my neighbor. He's lived here for 20 years. Young man, you are making a mistake." "I said get inside," Braden bellowed. He turned back to Marcus. "You know her. You got her intimidated. Is that it? She's scared of you?" Marcus felt a spark of genuine anger for the first time. The insinuation was disgusting, but he tamped it down instantly. Emotion was the enemy of survival in these moments. "Officer, look at the woman," Marcus said firmly. "She is not distressed. She is defending me. You are escalating a non-existent situation. I am asking you to de-escalate. Take a breath. Look around you. It's 11:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. I am wearing safety goggles. This is not a crime scene." Neighbors were starting to emerge. Across the street, Bill Henderson, a retired dentist, stood on his lawn with his arms crossed. 2 houses down, Sarah Jenkins was holding her phone up the camera lens pointed directly at them. The audience was growing. Braden sensed it too, but instead of making him cautious, it made him desperate to assert dominance. "I'm done asking," Braden said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "For what?" Marcus asked. "You have not established probable cause. You have a neighbor verifying my identity. You have visual evidence of construction work. Arresting me now would be a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights and a deprivation of liberty under color of law. Resisting arrest, obstruction." Braden listed off, reaching for his handcuffs. "You're failing to identify during an investigation. That is not a secondary offense you can arrest for without a primary crime." Marcus corrected him, almost like a professor chiding a student. "Identify the primary crime, officer." Braden didn't have an answer. He didn't have a crime. He had a feeling, and that feeling had been challenged. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's left wrist. Marcus didn't pull away. Pulling away is resisting. He went limp in the arm, allowing Braden to manipulate the limb. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated clearly for Sarah's phone recording. "I am complying under duress. I am stating for the record that this is an unlawful arrest." "Shut up." Braden yanked Marcus's arm behind his back with unnecessary force, twisting the shoulder joint. Marcus winced, but remained silent. He knew that any sound of pain could be interpreted as a struggle in a police report. "My wallet is in my back right pocket," Marcus said calmly as the first cuff clicked. "Inside you will find my driver's license. Behind that you will find my federal credentials. I strongly suggest you check those before you proceed." Braden ignored him. He slapped the second cuff on, tightening it until it bit into the skin. He spun Marcus around and marched him toward the cruiser, pushing him roughly. Marcus stumbled slightly but caught his balance. "You can tell it to the judge," Braden said, feeling a surge of triumph. He had won. He had taken the big man down. "Oh, I will," Marcus whispered too low for Braden to hear. "But not the judge you're thinking of." The walk to the patrol car was a parade of humiliation designed by Officer Braden. He didn't just walk Marcus, he paraded him. He kept a hand firmly on the back of Marcus's neck, a control hold usually reserved for combatants. The sawdust on Marcus's shirt brushed against the pristine uniform of the officer. As they reached the rusted Ford F-150 in the driveway, Braden shoved Marcus against it to pat him down. This was the moment caught on the dash cam, the violent impact of a compliant man being treated like a violent felon. "Spread 'em," Braden ordered, kicking Marcus's feet apart. Marcus complied. He stared at the reflection in his truck window. He saw a man who had spent decades fighting to make policing better, now being victimized by the very worst of it. He felt the officer's hands rifling through his pockets. Braden pulled out the wallet. He didn't open it. He just shoved it into his own cargo pocket. He pulled out the keys to the truck. He pulled out a folding pocket knife, a standard tool for cutting twine. "Weapon," Braden announced to no one, placing it on the hood of the cruiser. "It's a tool," Marcus said. "Just like the pry bar." "Silence." Braden grabbed Marcus by the arm again and opened the back door of the cruiser. "Get in." Getting into the back of a police car while handcuffed is difficult for anyone. For a man of Marcus's size, it was an ergonomic nightmare. He had to twist and contort his body. Braden didn't help. He watched hand on the door, impatient. When Marcus was halfway in, Braden slammed the door shut, forcing Marcus to pull his legs in rapidly to avoid them being crushed. Inside, the air was stale and smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat. The partition was a caged wall separating him from the front. Marcus shifted, trying to find a position that didn't cut off the circulation to his hands. Outside, he could see Eleanor standing on her porch, weeping. Bill Henderson had crossed the street and was yelling something at Braden. Braden was yelling back, pointing a finger in the older man's face. "Back off or you're next," Braden shouted at the retired dentist. Marcus shook his head slowly. Witness intimidation, he noted mentally. Aggressive posturing towards bystanders. The list of infractions was growing by the second. Braden was digging a hole so deep he would never see the sun again. Braden finally got into the driver's seat. He was breathing hard, pumped full of adrenaline. He adjusted his rearview mirror to look at Marcus. "Not so tough now, are you?" Braden taunted. "Thought you could lawyer your way out of it." Marcus looked directly into the mirror-locking eyes with the young officer. He said nothing. He had already pivoted his strategy. The time for de-escalation was over. The time for litigation had begun. He would exercise his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent so thoroughly that it would haunt Braden. Braden started the car, revving the engine unnecessarily. He peeled out of the driveway, forcing the neighbors to step back. As they drove away from the quiet sanctuary of Elm Street, Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't praying. He was memorizing. He was replaying every second of the last 15 minutes, locking every detail into his mind. The angle of the sun. The exact words spoken. The force used. He was building his case file. The drive to the precinct took 20 minutes. For the first 5, Braden was high on his victory. He tapped on the steering wheel, checked his computer terminal, and radioed dispatch with a swagger in his voice. "1 in custody. Male black. Obstruction resisting possession of burglary tools. En route to station." "Copy that, 402, the dispatcher replied. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the silence from the back seat started to fill the car. Silence is a powerful weapon. Most people arrested can't stop talking. They beg, they plead, they threaten, they curse. They give the officer something to react to, something to justify the arrest. Marcus Thorne sat like a statue. He breathed rhythmically in through the nose, out through the mouth. He didn't ask where they were going. He didn't ask for water. He didn't complain about the cuffs. Braden glanced in the mirror again. "You got a record. Is that why you didn't want to show ID?" Silence. "I'm going to find it anyway. Once we print you, everything comes up. If you have warrants, you're done." Silence. Braden shifted in his seat. The silence was unnerving him. It felt professional. It felt like the silence of someone who knew something he didn't. "You're making this worse for yourself," Braden said, his voice losing some of its edge. "If you just cooperate, maybe I talk to the DA. Maybe we drop the resisting charge." It was a classic ploy, the fake offer of help. Marcus almost smiled. He had written the training module on why this interrogation technique was ineffective and unethical for patrol officers to use during transport. He kept his face impassive. Marcus's mind was working through the timeline of what would happen next. They would arrive. He would be processed. His property would be inventoried. And that was the moment the bomb would go off. He thought about the credentials in his wallet. The badge was silver and gold encased in heavy leather. It identified him as a special liaison to the Attorney General's office. It granted him clearance levels that Officer Braden couldn't even Google. It included a card with a 24-hour direct line to the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. Braden was driving a hearse to his own funeral, and he didn't even know it. "Cat got your tongue." Braden snapped, the irritation returning. He turned up the radio, blasting talk radio to drown out the quiet. Marcus looked out the window. They were passing the city park, the library, the high school, places he had visited as a liaison to discuss community policing initiatives. He knew the chief of police, Robert Galloway. They had played golf 3 months ago at a charity fundraiser. He knew the mayor. He knew the watch commander on duty, Lieutenant Miller. Miller was a good man, tired but good. He was trying to reform the department. He had told Marcus over coffee that the biggest problem was the young cowboys who watched too many movies and didn't respect the community. Marcus wondered if Miller knew he had a cowboy like Braden loose in the field. He was about to find out. The cruiser turned into the precinct parking lot. Braden parked in the Sally Port, the secure garage for prisoner intake. The heavy metal door rolled down behind them, sealing them in. "End of the line," Braden said. He got out and opened the back door. "Let's go." Marcus stepped out. His legs were stiff, his shoulders burned, but he stood tall. He looked at the security cameras in the corners of the garage. He nodded once, acknowledging the recording. Braden grabbed his arm again, rougher this time, trying to provoke a reaction one last time. "Move it." They walked through the heavy steel door into the processing area. The smell of the station was familiar to Marcus, coffee floor wax and misery. This was it. The reveal was seconds away. The processing area was bright lit by humming fluorescent tubes. Behind the high counter sat Sergeant Tom Reynolds. Reynolds was 62, a man who had seen every kind of criminal and every kind of cop in his 40 years on the job. He was reading a report, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. "What do we have, Braden?" Reynolds asked without looking up. "Refusal to identify obstruction possession of burglary tools," Braden announced proudly. "Guy was casing a house on Elm Street. Tried to intimidate the homeowner." Reynolds looked up. He saw the large black man in the sawdust-covered t-shirt. He looked at the face. He paused. The face was familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. Marcus was usually in a suit when he visited the station, not work clothes. "Name?" Reynolds asked the prisoner. Marcus stayed silent. "He won't talk," Braden said. "He thinks he's smart." "I need his ID for booking," Reynolds sighed. "You get his wallet?" "Yeah, right here." Braden pulled the leather wallet from his cargo pocket and tossed it onto the counter. It landed with a heavy thud. Reynolds picked it up. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. Marcus Aurelius Thorne. The address 412 Elm Street. "Braden," Reynolds said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "His address is 412 Elm. Where did you arrest him?" 414 Elm, Braden said. "Next door. He was prying at the window." "He lives next door." Reynolds looked at Braden over his glasses. "Did you check that?" He claimed he did, but he was acting suspicious. Reynolds shook his head and flipped the flap of the wallet. There it was. The gold embossment caught the overhead light. United States Department of Justice. Federal Community Liaison. Executive level. Civil Rights Division. Reynolds stopped breathing for a second. He looked at the photo on the credentials. A man in a suit and tie. He looked at the man in handcuffs. It was the same man. Reynolds stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the file cabinet. "Unlock him," Reynolds said. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of impending doom. "What?" Braden asked, confused. Unlock him. Now! Reynolds shouted, his face going pale. Sarge, he resisted. I have to process. You just arrested the federal liaison for the DOJ, you idiot. Reynolds slammed the wallet down on the counter. This is the guy who audits us. This is Marcus Thorne. The door to the inner office opened. Lieutenant Miller walked out holding a mug of coffee. What is all the yelling out here I can hear you in? Miller stopped. He looked at Marcus Thorne standing by the bench, hands cuffed behind his back, sawdust on his shirt. He looked at Officer Braden, who was looking confused and defensive. Miller's mug dropped. It shattered on the linoleum floor, hot coffee splashing everywhere. Nobody moved. Mr. Thorne, Miller choked out. Lieutenant Miller, Marcus said. His voice was calm, echoing slightly in the silent room. I believe your officer has made a significant error. Miller moved faster than a man of his age should be able to. He rushed around the counter, pushing Braden aside physically. Give me the key, he snapped at Braden. Braden fumbled for his keys, his hands starting to shake. I didn't know. He wouldn't show ID. He had a pry bar. Miller snatched the keys and unlocked the cuffs himself. The metal clicked open. Marcus brought his arms forward, slowly rotating his shoulders to work out the stiffness. He rubbed his wrists where red welts had formed. I am so sorry, Miller said, his voice trembling. Mr. Thorne, please. Come into my office. Let me get you some water. Let me call the chief. Marcus didn't move. He stood in the center of the booking room, looking at Officer Braden. Braden was shrinking, his bravado evaporating like mist. He looked like a child who had just broken a priceless vase. I don't want water, Lieutenant, Marcus said. I want to file a formal complaint, and I want the preservation order for all body cam, dash cam, and booking area footage signed immediately. Of course, Miller said. Anything. We can drop all the charges right now. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. No, Marcus said, his voice hard as steel. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a violation, and we are going to treat it as such. Marcus walked out of the precinct 40 minutes later. He refused a ride home from the lieutenant. He called his wife, who came to pick him up. He didn't say much on the ride home, but the fury was radiating off him. He didn't go to sleep that night. He went to his home office. He sat at his desk, still wearing the sawdust-covered clothes, and began to type. He didn't just write a complaint. He wrote a legal brief. He cited the specific statutes Braden had violated. Terry v. Ohio, Fourth Amendment, false imprisonment, deprivation of rights under color of law. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, the document was on the desk of the U.S. Attorney for the district. By 10:00 a.m., a courier delivered a copy to Chief Galloway. The reaction was instantaneous. The department tried to do damage control. Chief Galloway called Marcus personally, offering a public apology offering to suspend Braden immediately. Suspension is a paid vacation, Robert, Marcus told the chief over the phone. I'm not interested in your internal disciplinary matrix. I'm interested in why a man with his psychological profile was ever given a badge and a gun. 2 days later, the story leaked. Marcus hadn't leaked it, but the neighbors had. Sarah Jenkins posted her video. It showed the gentle giant of a neighbor explaining the lumber and the aggressive young cop screaming at him. It went viral locally, then nationally. The caption read, "Cop arrests federal agent for fixing neighbor's porch." The media descended on Oak Creek. Reporters camped out on Elm Street. They interviewed Eleanor Vance, who gave a scathing testimony about how that nice boy, Braden, had terrified her and arrested the kindest man in the world. Then came the lawsuit. It wasn't just about the arrest. Marcus's lawyers, the best civil rights attorneys in the state, friends he had worked with for years, subpoenaed Braden's entire personnel file. They found what Marcus knew they would find. Braden had 6 prior complaints in 3 years. Excessive force, abusive language, racial profiling. All of them had been marked unsubstantiated by internal affairs. Unsubstantiated, Marcus told the press in a press conference held on his front lawn. That is the word they use to hide the truth. But you cannot hide from the camera, and you cannot hide from the Constitution. The lawsuit named Braden individually. It named the sergeant who signed off on the prior complaints. It named the city of Oak Creek for failure to train and supervise. It was a scorching earth strategy. Marcus wasn't looking for a settlement to go away. He was looking for a judgment that would force change. The discovery phase was brutal for the department. Marcus's team deposed Braden. Under oath without his uniform, Braden crumbled. He couldn't articulate the legal standard for reasonable suspicion. He admitted he didn't know who lived at the house. He admitted he was angry that Marcus challenged his authority. So, Marcus's lawyer asked, "You arrested him because he hurt your feelings." "I arrested him because he wouldn't comply," Braden mumbled. "Compliance with an unlawful order is not required by law, Officer Braden. Did they teach you that at the academy?" Braden had no answer. The end for Officer Kyle Braden came swiftly. He was terminated 3 months after the incident. The termination letter was public record. It cited gross incompetence, violation of civil rights, and conduct unbecoming. He was stripped of his certification, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. But Marcus didn't stop there. The Department of Justice, prompted by the undeniable evidence and their own liaison's involvement, opened a pattern or practice investigation into the Oak Creek Police Department. They found systemic issues with how the department handled stops of minority residents. 6 months later, the city signed a consent decree. It was a legally binding agreement to overhaul their use of force policies, implement mandatory bias training, and create an independent civilian oversight board. The board would have the power to subpoena officers and review all body cam footage. The city settled Marcus's lawsuit for $1.2 million. Marcus didn't keep a dime. He established the Eleanor Vance Legal Defense Fund, named after his neighbor. The fund provided free legal representation for residents of Oak Creek who had been victims of police misconduct but couldn't afford a lawyer. On a Tuesday morning 1 year later, Marcus was back in Eleanor's yard. He was painting the lattice work he had installed that fateful day. It was a bright, sunny morning. A patrol car drove by. It was a new officer, a young woman. She slowed down. She waved. Marcus stood up, put down his brush, and waved back. She didn't stop to interrogate. She didn't assume. She just waved and continued her patrol. Marcus watched the car disappear around the corner. He felt a sense of satisfaction, but it was heavy. He knew that if he had been a roofer named Jamal instead of a federal liaison named Marcus, he might still be in jail. He might have a felony record. He might have lost his job. He sat down on the porch steps next to Eleanor, who handed him a glass of lemonade. "You changed things, Marcus," she said, patting his knee. "We changed things, Eleanor," he corrected her, "but it shouldn't have been this hard." The sun was warm. The neighborhood was quiet. Justice had been served, but the scar remained. It was a reminder that authority without accountability is just tyranny in a uniform, and that sometimes the only thing standing between a citizen and a cage is the courage to say no. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have shown your ID to avoid the hassle, or would you have stood your ground to protect your rights? It's a question that's easy to answer from the comfort of your home, but much harder when the handcuffs are coming out. This story matters because freedom isn't free, it's rented, and the rent is due every day. Marcus Thorne paid his share. Now it's up to us to pay ours. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the nature of power and justice, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We are here to tell the stories that the system wants you to forget. See you in the next one.